as the sun began to rise, casting a golden hue over the churning ocean. Dawn felt the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The creature beneath the waves was massive, its shadow stretching ominously beneath the surface. She glanced back at her friends, their faces a mix of fear and determination. They had been throwing anything they could find, rocks, pieces of driftwood, even their backpacks, hoping to distract the beast long enough to reach the safety of the shore. Suddenly, a loud splash echoed through the air, and one of their group, Jake, lost his grip on the edge of the makeshift raft. "No!" Dawn screamed, reaching out as he disappeared beneath the waves. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. They were not all going to make it. With a final push, the remaining survivors, Dawn, Denise, and Leo, managed to scramble onto the rocky beach, panting and soaked to the bone. Their relief was short-lived. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and a low growl rumbled from the tree line. A massive land creature, covered in thick, bristly fur and with eyes that glowed like embers, emerged from the shadows, its gaze locked onto them. "Run!" Denise shouted, her voice breaking the spell of fear that had momentarily paralyzed them. They sprinted down the beach, the creature hot on their heels, its claws digging into the sand with each powerful stride. As they ran, Dawn's mind raced. They needed a plan. "We can't just keep running," she yelled over her shoulder. "We need to find a way to fight back or hide." Leo, always the strategist, pointed toward a cluster of jagged rocks jutting out from the shoreline. "There, we can use the rocks as cover. Maybe we can find a way to trap it." They veered toward the rocks, their hearts pounding in their chests. As they ducked behind the first outcropping, they could hear the creature crashing through the underbrush, its breath heavy and labored. Dawn's eyes darted around, searching for anything they could use as a weapon. "Look!" Denise exclaimed, pointing to a sharp piece of coral that had washed ashore. "We can use that to defend ourselves." Dawn grabbed the coral, feeling its weight in her hand. It was jagged and dangerous, just like the situation they were in. "We need to lure it closer," she said, her voice steadying as she formulated a plan. "If we can get it to come around the rocks, we might be able to trap it between the outcroppings." As they prepared to execute their plan, the creature's growl grew louder, and they could see its massive form moving closer. The three of them exchanged determined glances, knowing that this was their only chance to survive. Dawn took a deep breath, her heart racing as she steadied herself. "Okay, on my count, we'll make some noise to draw it in. Leo, you and Denise stay behind the rocks and be ready to flank it. I'll try to get its attention." Leo nodded, gripping a piece of coral tightly. "Just be careful, Dawn. We can't afford to lose anyone else." Denise placed a hand on Dawn's shoulder, her eyes wide with fear but filled with resolve. "We can do this. We have to." Dawn took a step out from behind the rocks, raising her arms and shouting, "Hey, over here." She waved her arms, trying to make herself as visible as possible. The creature paused, its glowing eyes narrowing as it focused on her. The ground shook as it charged forward, its massive form barreling through the underbrush. Dawn's heart raced, but she stood her ground, hoping her friends were ready. Just as the creature reached the edge of the rocks, she darted to the side, leading it into the narrow passage between the outcroppings. "Now!" she yelled. Leo and Denise sprang into action, flanking the creature as it stumbled into the rocky trap. The creature roared in frustration, its claws scraping against the stone as it tried to turn around. Dawn could see the panic in its eyes, and for a moment, she felt a pang of sympathy. She knew they had no choice. It was them or the creature. "Hit it now!" Leo shouted, lunging forward with his coral weapon. He aimed for the creature's flank, hoping to distract it long enough for Denise to get a shot in. Denise followed suit, throwing her piece of coral with all her strength. It struck the creature's side, causing it to howl in pain. The sound echoed through the air, a mix of anger and fear. The creature turned its attention to them, its eyes blazing with fury. Dawn seized the moment. "Keep it distracted. I'll try to find something to bind it." She scanned the area, her eyes landing on some thick vines hanging from a nearby tree. If they could just get the creature to stay in place long enough, They might be able to restrain it. Dawn, be careful, Denise shouted, but Dawn was already moving, darting around the rocks to grab the vines. She could hear the creature thrashing behind her, its growls growing more desperate. With the vines in hand, she rushed back to her friends. We need to get it to the ground. On three, we all charge at it. Are you crazy? Leo exclaimed, but the urgency in Dawn's eyes convinced him. Fine, on three. 1, 2, 3, they all charged forward, shouting and waving their weapons. The creature, startled by their sudden movement, turned to face them, its massive jaw snapping in their direction. Dawn threw the vines at the creature, aiming for its legs. They landed with a thud, wrapping around its powerful limbs. Now, pull, she shouted. Together, they yanked on the vines, trying to bring the creature down. It roared and thrashed, but the combined strength of the three of them began to take effect. Slowly, the creature stumbled, its legs giving way as it fell to the ground with a heavy thud. Breathless and trembling, they quickly wrapped the vines around its body, securing it as best they could. The creature struggled, but it was clear they had the upper hand. Is it over? Denise panted, her eyes wide with disbelief. Dawn looked at her friends, their faces a mix of exhaustion and triumph. I think so, we did it. Just as they caught their breath, the ground began to tremble again, and a low rumble echoed from the ocean. Dawn's heart sank. What now? She whispered, glancing back toward the water. From the depths of the ocean, another shadow began to rise, larger and more menacing than the first. The battle was far from over. Get ready, Leo shouted, gripping his coral weapon tightly. We need to find a way to defend ourselves again. Dawn's mind raced. They had survived the land creature, but now they faced an even greater threat. It was the creature they had contact with before they got to land. The very creature that took their friend Jake's life. We need to find shelter. There is a cave up the beach, she yelled, pointing toward a dark opening in the cliffside. Let's go, Denise urged, and they sprinted toward the cave, the sound of the ocean creature's roar echoing behind them. They had to regroup and come up with a new plan, or they wouldn't survive the day. As they reached the cave, they ducked inside, panting and wide-eyed. The darkness enveloped them, providing a momentary reprieve from the chaos outside. Dawn leaned against the cool stone wall, her heart pounding in her chest. The cave was damp and musty, the air thick with the scent of salt and earth. She could hear the distant roar of the creature from the ocean, a reminder that their fight was far from over. Do you think it saw us? Denise whispered, her voice trembling slightly. I don't know, Leo replied, peering cautiously out of the cave entrance. We can't stay here for long. We need to figure out what we're up against. Dawn took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing thoughts. We need to gather our strength and come up with a plan. We can't just wait for it to come after us. Maybe we can use the cave to our advantage, Leo suggested, his eyes scanning the rocky walls. If we can find some way to create a trap or a barricade, we might be able to hold it off long enough to escape. Denise nodded, her fear slowly being replaced by determination. What if we use the rocks inside the cave? We could create a barrier at the entrance. Dawn's mind raced with possibilities. If we can find some sharp objects or anything that could serve as a weapon, we could defend ourselves if it gets too close. They began to search the cave, moving cautiously through the shadows. The walls were rough and uneven, and the ground was littered with small stones and debris. Dawn's fingers brushed against something hard and metallic. She knelt to investigate, pulling out a rusted piece of metal that looked like it had once been part of a shipwreck. Look at this, she exclaimed, holding it up. It could work as a weapon. Leo and Denise gathered around her, their eyes lighting up at the sight of the makeshift weapon. We can use this to defend ourselves if it comes in, Leo said, taking the metal piece from Dawn and testing its weight in his hands. As they continued to search, they found more debris, broken pieces of wood, shards of glass, and even a few old fishing nets. They quickly set to work, piling the rocks and debris at the entrance of the cave to create a barricade. Do you think it will hold? Denise asked, glancing nervously at the cave entrance. It has to, Dawn replied, her voice firm. We need to be ready for whatever comes next. Just as they finished fortifying their makeshift barricade, the ground shook again, and the roar of the creature grew louder. Dawn's heart raced as she exchanged worried glances with her friends. They could hear the crashing of waves and the sound of something massive moving through the water. It's coming, Leo hissed, gripping the metal weapon tightly. Dawn took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. We need to stay quiet and wait for it to get closer. We'll surprise it when it comes through the entrance. They huddled together, their breaths shallow as they listened to the sounds outside. The roar of the creature echoed through the cave, sending chills down Dawn's spine. She could feel the tension in the air, a palpable sense of dread as they prepared for the inevitable confrontation. Suddenly, the ground shook violently, and the entrance of the cave was illuminated by a blinding flash of light. Dawn squinted against the brightness, her heart racing as she realized the creature was right outside. "Get ready," she whispered urgently. The creature's massive form loomed in the entrance, its glowing eyes piercing through the darkness. It let out a deafening roar, shaking the very walls of the cave. Dawn's instincts kicked in, and she raised the metal weapon, ready to defend herself and her friends. "Now," she shouted, and they charged forward, ready to face the creature head-on. The battle for their survival was about to begin yet again. The moment they charged, the creature lunged forward, its massive jaws snapping. Just inches from Dawn, she swung the rusted metal piece with all her might, aiming for the creature's snout. The metal clanged against its hard scales, sending a jolt of pain through her arm but momentarily stunning the beast. "Keep moving," Leo shouted, darting to the side to avoid the creature's thrashing tail. Denise followed suit, her eyes wide with fear but her determination unwavering. Dawn quickly regained her footing, her heart pounding as she assessed the situation. The creature was disoriented but not defeated. It shook its head, letting out a low growl that reverberated through the cave. "We need to distract it," she yelled, glancing at her friends. "Denise, throw something." Denise grabbed a handful of small stones from the ground and hurled them at the creature. The stones bounced off its thick hide, but the noise caught its attention. It turned its glowing eyes toward Denise, momentarily forgetting about Dawn and Leo. "Now's our chance," Leo shouted, lunging forward again with the metal weapon. He aimed for the creature's flank, hoping to land another blow. Dawn followed suit, swinging her weapon with all her strength. The creature roared in anger, its massive body twisting as it tried to shake them off. Dawn felt a surge of adrenaline as she pressed forward, determined to protect her friends. "We can't let it escape," she yelled, her voice rising above the chaos. Just then, the creature reared back, preparing to unleash another deafening roar. Dawn's instincts kicked in, and she ducked low, narrowly avoiding the blast of sound that echoed through the cave. The force of the roar sent a shockwave through the air, knocking Denise off her feet. "Denise!" Dawn cried, rushing to her friend's side. She helped her up, glancing back at the creature, which was now focused on Leo, who was still trying to land a hit. "Get back!" Leo shouted, dodging the creature's snapping jaws. He managed to strike again, but the creature was growing more furious by the second. Dawn's mind raced. They needed a new strategy. "We have to lure it deeper into the cave," she shouted. "If we can get it away from the entrance, we might have a chance." "Right," Leo agreed, panting heavily. "Denise, can you throw more rocks? We'll lead it away." Denise nodded, her fear replaced by a fierce determination. She picked up more stones and began tossing them deeper into the cave, creating a cacophony of noise that echoed off the walls. The creature, drawn by the sound, turned its attention away from Leo and Dawn, lumbering deeper into the cave after Denise's distraction. "Now!" Dawn yelled, and they both sprinted after it, keeping close to the walls to avoid its thrashing limbs. As they moved deeper into the cave, the air grew cooler, and the light from the entrance faded. Dawn could hear the creature's heavy footsteps behind them, but they pressed on, determined to find a way to trap it. "Look!" Leo pointed to a narrow passageway that veered off to the right. "If we can get it to follow us in there, we might be able to block it off." "Let's do it!" Dawn shouted, leading the way as they dashed toward the passage. Denise continued to throw stones, keeping the creature's attention focused on them. As they reached the narrow passage, they quickly ducked inside, pressing themselves against the walls. The creature, now fully enraged, barreled into the opening, its massive body wedged tightly as it tried to follow them. "Now, block it," Dawn yelled, grabbing a large rock and shoving it against the entrance. Leo and Denise quickly joined her, pushing with all their strength. The creature roared in frustration, its claws scraping against the stone as it struggled to free itself. Dawn could feel the ground tremble beneath her feet, but they kept pushing, adrenaline fueling their efforts. With one final heave, they managed to block the entrance just as the creature let out a deafening roar. The sound echoed through the cave, but they had done it. They had trapped it. Breathless and trembling, they leaned against the wall, their hearts racing. Is it over now?" Denise panted, her eyes wide with disbelief. Dawn looked at her friends, their faces a mix of exhaustion and triumph. "I think so. We did it." As they caught their breath, the ground began to tremble yet again, and a low rumble echoed from the outside of the cave. Dawn's heart sank. "What now?" she whispered, glancing back at Dawn and Leo. It was a sound that seemed to shake the very foundation of the cave. The walls trembled, and the air grew thick with tension. Dawn exchanged worried glances with Leo and Denise. Their earlier triumphs had quickly faded into dread. "What is that?" Denise asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Leo replied, his brow furrowed in concern. "It doesn't sound good." Dawn's heart raced as she tried to make sense of the situation. "We need to get out of here. If there's another creature out there, we can't stay trapped in this cave." Just then, the ground shook violently, and a crack appeared in the cave wall, sending small rocks tumbling to the ground. "We have to move," Dawn shouted, her instincts kicking in. "This place isn't safe anymore." They turned to flee deeper into the cave, but the sound of crashing rocks grew louder, echoing ominously around them. The creature they had trapped was still roaring in frustration, but now it seemed to be joined by another, more powerful presence. "Over here," Leo pointed to a narrow tunnel that branched off to the left. "We can escape through there." Without hesitation, they sprinted toward the tunnel, the sound of their footsteps mingling with the growls and roars that reverberated through the cave. As they entered the tunnel, the air grew colder, and the darkness enveloped them once more. "Do you think we lost it?" Denise panted, glancing back nervously. "I don't know," Dawn replied, her voice tense. "We can't stop. We need to find a way out." They pressed on, the tunnel winding and twisting like a serpent. The sounds of the creature faded, but the rumbling from outside grew louder, a constant reminder that danger was still lurking just beyond their reach. Suddenly, the tunnel opened up into a vast chamber, illuminated by bioluminescent fungi that clung to the walls. The sight was both beautiful and eerie, casting an otherworldly glow over the rocky surfaces. "Wow," Denise breathed, momentarily distracted by the sight. "This place is incredible." "Focus," Leo urged, scanning the chamber for any signs of danger. "We need to find another way out." Dawn stepped further into the chamber, her eyes darting around. "Look over there." She pointed to a series of ledges that climbed up the wall. "If we can get to the top, we might find an exit. Let's go," Leo said, leading the way as they began to climb. The ledges were uneven and slippery, but they managed to scale the wall, their hearts pounding with each step. As they reached the top, they found themselves in a narrow passage that seemed to lead outside. The sound of crashing rocks was now deafening, and the air was thick with dust. They exchanged glances, a mix of hope and fear in their eyes. "Do you think it's safe?" Denise asked, her voice trembling. "We won't know until we try," Dawn replied, her determination unwavering. "We have to get out of here." They stepped cautiously into the passage, the light from the outside growing brighter with each step. As they neared the exit, the ground shook again, and the roar of the creature echoed behind them, sending a jolt of panic through Dawn's chest. "Run!" she shouted, and they sprinted toward the light, adrenaline propelling them forward. Just as they burst out of the cave, the sun blinded them momentarily. They shielded their eyes, taking in the sight of the ocean before them. Their relief was short-lived as they turned to see the creature they had trapped now free, its massive form emerging from the cave behind them. The second creature rises from the opposite direction. Dawn! Leo shouted, pulling her back as the two beasts roared in unison. Their eyes locked onto the trio. What do we do now? Dawn's mind raced. They were out of the cave, but they were far from safe. We need to find shelter. There's no way we can fight them both. Over there, Denise pointed to a cluster of jagged rocks further down the beach. We can hide behind those. Let's go! Dawn yelled, and they sprinted toward the rocks, the sound of the creatures crashing through the surf echoing behind them. As they reached the shelter of the rocks, they pressed themselves against the cool stone, their hearts pounding in their chests. Dawn peered around the edge, watching as the two creatures circled each other, their glowing eyes scanning the beach. What are they doing? Leo whispered, his voice tense. I think they're sizing each other up, Dawn replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The two creatures, massive and fearsome, were locked in a standoff, their scales glistening in the sunlight as they moved cautiously, muscles coiling like springs. Denise shivered beside her. What if they decide to come this way? We'll have to be ready to move, Leo said, his eyes darting between the creatures and the rocky outcrop. If they start fighting, we might have a chance to slip away. Dawn nodded, her heart racing. The sight of the two beasts was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. One was the creature they had trapped, its scales a deep emerald green, while the other was a darker, more menacing figure, with jagged spines running down its back and eyes that glowed like molten gold. He is the one they temporarily took down when they first arrived. Suddenly, the emerald creature let out a deafening roar, challenging its rival. The sound echoed across the beach, sending a flock of birds scattering into the sky. The dark creature responded with a growl that rumbled like thunder, and in an instant, they lunged at each other, claws slashing and teeth snapping. Now's our chance, Dawn shouted, adrenaline surging through her veins. We need to get to the trees. Right, Leo agreed, his eyes wide with determination. Follow me. They dashed from their hiding spot, sprinting toward the line of trees that bordered the beach. The ground shook beneath them as the two creatures collided, their roars and growls mixing with the sound of crashing waves. Dawn could feel the heat radiating from their battle, and she pushed herself to run faster. As they reached the trees, they ducked behind a thick trunk, panting heavily. Dawn peered around the side, watching the chaos unfold. The creatures were locked in a fierce struggle, their massive bodies crashing against each other, sending sprays of sand and debris flying. Dawn glanced back at the creatures, who were still locked in combat, oblivious to their presence. The emerald beast then let out a furious roar, and the dark creature responded with a deep growl. Now, let's go, Dawn yelled, and they took off running deeper into the forest, the sounds of their footsteps muffled by the underbrush. They ran as fast as they could, weaving between trees and dodging branches. The sounds of the creatures' roars faded into the distance. Dawn's heart raced as they pushed forward, adrenaline fueling their escape. After what felt like an eternity, they finally slowed down, panting heavily as they reached a small clearing. They collapsed onto the ground, their bodies trembling from the exertion. Did we lose them? Denise gasped, looking around nervously. I think so, Leo replied, his chest heaving. We can't let our guard down. We need to keep moving. Dawn nodded, her mind still racing. We should find a higher ground. If we can get a vantage point, we might be able to see where those creatures went and plan our next move. Good idea, Leo said, pushing himself up from the ground. Let's head toward that ridge over there. He pointed to a slope that rose steeply in the distance, partially obscured by trees. As they made their way toward the ridge, the forest around them felt alive with tension. The sounds of the ocean were now a distant roar, replaced by the rustling of leaves and the occasional call of a bird. Each step felt heavy with the weight of their recent escape, and the fear of what might still be lurking nearby. Do you think they'll follow us? Denise asked, glancing over her shoulder as they climbed. I don't know, Dawn replied, her voice steady despite the uncertainty. We can't take that chance. We need to keep moving. They reached the base of the ridge and began to climb, the ground uneven and littered with rocks. As they ascended, the trees thinned out, and soon they found themselves at the top, overlooking a breathtaking view of the coastline. Wow, Denise breathed, taking in the sight. The ocean stretched out before them, waves crashing against the rocks below, while the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Look, Leo pointed toward the beach. There is the cave entrance. Dawn squinted, trying to make out the details. There are the creatures, she said, her heart sinking. The two beasts were still on the beach, but now they were circling each other, their roars echoing across the water. What are they doing now? Denise asked, her voice barely above a whisper. It looks like they're still fighting, Leo replied, his brow furrowed. We need to figure out how to get away from here. Dawn scanned the area, her mind racing. There's a path that leads down the other side of the ridge. If we can get to it, we might be able to find a way back to civilization. Let's go then, Leo urged, already moving toward the path. We can't stay here. They carefully made their way down the ridge, the ground steep and rocky. Once they reached the bottom, they found themselves in a dense thicket. The trees were thick and the underbrush was tangled, making it difficult to navigate. Dawn led the way, pushing through the foliage, her heart pounding with each rustle of leaves. Do you think we're far enough away? Denise asked, her voice tinged with anxiety. I hope so, Dawn replied, glancing back at Leo, who was keeping pace behind them. We can't stop until we're sure. They pressed on, the thicket gradually opening up into a small clearing. Dawn paused, taking a moment to catch her breath. We need to find a landmark or something that can help us figure out where we are. Look, Leo pointed to a rocky outcrop in the distance. That might be a good place to get our bearings. Let's head there, Dawn said, feeling a renewed sense of determination. They moved toward the outcrop, the ground becoming firmer beneath their feet. As they approached, they could see that the outcrop was taller than they had initially thought, rising sharply from the ground. We can climb it, Leo suggested, glancing up at the rocky surface. Be careful, Denise warned, her eyes wide. It looks a bit unstable. Dawn nodded, her instincts kicking in. We'll take it slow, one step at a time. They began to climb, using the jagged rocks for handholds. The ascent was challenging, but they worked together, encouraging one another as they made their way to the top. Finally, they reached the summit, and the view that greeted them was breathtaking. Look at that, Leo exclaimed, pointing toward the horizon. There's a small village over there. Dawn squinted, her heart racing with hope. If we can get there, we might find help. Let's go, Denise urged, her voice filled with excitement. They carefully made their way back down the outcrop, their spirits lifted by the sight of the village. As they reached the bottom, they took one last look at the beach, where the two creatures were still locked in their battle, oblivious to the trio's escape. Let's stick to the trees as we head toward the village, Dawn suggested, her voice steadying as they moved away from the rocky outcrop. We don't want to attract any more attention. Agreed, Leo said, glancing back at the beach one last time. We need to stay low and quiet. They entered the forest again, the dense canopy providing cover as they navigated through the underbrush. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows that danced across the ground. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine, and the sounds of the forest enveloped them, a stark contrast to the chaos they had just escaped. As they moved deeper into the woods, Dawn felt a mix of hope and anxiety. The sight of the village had ignited a spark of determination within her, but the memory of the creature's ferocity lingered in her mind. We need to keep an eye out for any signs of danger, she reminded her friends. Right, Denise replied, her voice barely above a whisper. I just hope we don't run into any more of those things. They continued, the path becoming more defined as they approached the edge of the forest. Dawn could see the flickering lights of the village in the distance, a beacon of safety that urged them forward. As they neared the tree line, a sudden rustling in the bushes made them freeze. What was that? Leo whispered, his eyes wide with fear. Dawn held her breath, straining to listen. The rustling grew louder, and then, to their horror, a small creature burst from the underbrush. It was a wild boar, its bristly fur standing on end as it snorted and stomped its hooves. Just a boar, Dawn exhaled, relief washing over her. Let's keep moving. They stepped cautiously out of the trees and into the open. The village now just a short distance away. The sounds of laughter and music drifted toward them, a stark reminder of the normalcy they had been missing. As they approached, a sense of unease settled in Dawn's stomach. Do you think they'll believe us? Denise asked, glancing nervously at the village. They have to, Leo replied, his voice firm. We need to warn them about the creatures. As they reached the outskirts of the village, they were met with curious stares from the villagers. A few children played near a fountain, while adults gathered in small groups, their conversations halting as they noticed the trio's disheveled appearance. Hey, you three! A tall man with a weathered face called out, stepping forward. What happened to you? Dawn took a deep breath, her heart racing. We need your help. There are two massive creatures on the beach, and they're fighting. We barely escaped. The man's expression shifted from curiosity to concern. Creatures? What kind of creatures? One was a land creature and the other was a water creature. Leo interjected, his voice trembling slightly. We saw them fighting. They're dangerous. A murmur rippled through the crowd, and the man's brow furrowed. Big creatures? We haven't seen any around here in years. Are you sure? Yes? Denise insisted, stepping forward. We saw them with our own eyes. They're huge and powerful. You need to prepare. The man exchanged glances with the villagers and then nodded. Gather the others. We need to discuss this. As the villagers began to assemble, Dawn felt a mix of hope and dread. They had made it to safety, but the threat was far from over. Stay close, she whispered to Leo and Denise. We need to make sure everyone is ready. The villagers formed a circle, their faces a mix of skepticism and concern. Dawn stepped forward, her heart pounding as she prepared to share their story. We need to act quickly. If those creatures decide to come inland, we won't have much time. We have to get to work and fast. The tall man nodded, his expression serious. We'll gather weapons and prepare defenses. We need to know everything you saw. Every detail could help us. Dawn took a deep breath, her mind racing as she recounted the events of the day. The creatures were massive, each one a force of nature. The land creature had scales that shimmered like emeralds, and it moved with a speed that belied its size. The water creature was just as fearsome, with fins that glimmered like silver in the sunlight, and a roar that echoed across the waves. As she spoke, she could see the villagers' expressions shift from disbelief to determination. The tall man nodded, his brow furrowing deeper. We've heard tales of such beasts, but we thought they were just legends. If they're real, we need to prepare. Let's get to work, the man shouted, rallying the villagers. We need to protect our home. The villagers sprang into action, gathering tools and weapons from their homes. Dawn felt a surge of hope as she watched them move with purpose, their fear transforming into resolve. She turned to Leo and Denise, who were equally energized by the unfolding scene. Let's help, Leo said, his eyes bright with determination. We can't just stand by. Right, Denise agreed, her voice steadying. We know what we're up against. We can share our knowledge. They joined the villagers, helping to organize supplies and fortify the village's defenses. Dawn found herself working alongside the tall man, who introduced himself as Marcus. He was a natural leader, directing the villagers with a calm authority that inspired confidence. Do you have any experience with weapons? Marcus asked Dawn as they stacked wooden planks to reinforce the village's perimeter. Not much, she admitted. I can help with strategy. We need to create barriers and distractions to keep the creatures at bay. Good thinking, Marcus replied, nodding. We'll need to use the terrain to our advantage. If we can funnel them into a narrow area, we might stand a chance. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a warm glow over the village, the atmosphere shifted from one of fear to one of unity. Dawn felt a sense of camaraderie building among them, a shared purpose that transcended their fears. They were no longer just survivors. They were a community ready to fight for their home.